Yes, thank you so much to our breakfast crew for getting us started this morning. Saw Pete early this morning at 6:29 rolled in, and then 3 minutes later, Henry rolled in as well. So thank you so much for getting all this together. Thank you so much, Terry, for helping and assisting. Thank you to Kathy as well. So we are in good shape. Who's here for the very first time? Please raise your hand. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a number of things that we do here at the Humanist Society. We do things like crocheting sleeping mats for the homeless. We do things like philosophy under the influence. We have a number of volunteer things that we do around, not only here in the building, but around the valley as well. So these things, we try to go out and help the community as much as we possibly can. Spread the idea that we're all in this together. We all need to work together to make the world a better place. So if you're not already a member, please join us and check us out. In fact, we have our membership director right here who will gladly assist you with getting signed up if you should like to join us. We have a number of things that we do here, and it's all volunteer-led. The board, none of the board members get paid. None of the volunteers, nobody gets paid here. We all do this because we enjoy the work that we do. And we do appreciate any ideas that you might have. If there's an event that you would like to see, come see one of our board members. Board members, please raise your hands. And we will gladly take any suggestions that you might have for events. That being said, oh goodness, I forgot. So we are working right now on a number of projects that we are going to try to be getting into places like First Fridays. We're going to be creating essentially a workshop where we are creating art here in the building to utilize there because they don't typically like it. Organizations that don't sell art. Well, we as humanists believe that not only in the scientific method, but we believe that art is part of human expression and exploration. It's a way of us telling the world what we believe in, right? So we'd like to do that eventually. We're working on that project right now. We're eventually going to be working on getting some other projects going into parks, saying, I'm a humanist, ask me anything, those types of things. So those, we're also going to be working on something that Carol and I have been doing, possibly doing things like going to museums, right? Being a little more culturally aware. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, come talk to myself, talk to one of the board members. Speaking of boards, we have a board meeting today. If you'd like to see how what we do here gets done, please join us. We'd love to have your input as well. And if there's something that you're seeing that we're not doing, please tell us, because we're here to serve the community at large. That being said, we do have a Humanist Minute. Our secretary, Mr. Mike Shelton, is going to come up and give us a Humanist Minute. This is a tradition where this is what humanism means to us, and we invite anybody, if you'd like to tell us what humanism means to you, please come up and say that at either this meeting or one of the other meetings that we have coming up. Mike, here we go.
Thank you, Alex. I am pleased and honored to have an opportunity to read 3 of the principles of the Humanist Manifesto, it's called. Yeah. And this dates from 2003. This version of the manifesto was originally written in 1933, and it's been revised 3 times by various groups of humanist leaders. And the first 3 are so relevant to today's topic because it's about science and appreciating and understanding science. So let me quote from this. Again, this is not, as they say, not a creed, but a set of principles. There are 6 principles. I just want to touch on the first 3. First, knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. And then there's just a couple of sentences of explanation. I thought this, because this is science, it says, Humanists find that science is the best method for determining this knowledge, as well as for solving problems and developing beneficial technologies. We also recognize the value of new departures in thought, the arts, and inner experience, each subject to analysis by critical intelligence. So we're going to hear a lot about that this morning, I think. Then just briefly, the second principle is humans are an integral part of nature, the result of evolutionary change, the result of unguided evolutionary change. Unguided, nobody up there in the clouds steering. And third, ethical values are derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. Ethical values, morality, is derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. So with that, we can turn this over to Dr. Adam today. Dr. Adams. Oh, hey, not yet.
So we're going to have Shahryar introduce our speaker today. I'm very much looking forward to today's talk. So Shahryar, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. All right, so we'll have Professor Jim Adams, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Professor Jim Adams, when he was at Duke University, and he studied physics, and he double majored in physics and computer science, and he was in a hurry, finished that in 3 years. Then he went to University of Wisconsin, Madison, and he studied material science and engineering, did his PhD, again, finished in 3 years. And after that, he went and worked at Sandia Livermore National Laboratories. And then he was professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in material science and engineering for 7 years. And then he came to ASU, and he's been a program chair in material science and engineering. He's been a president's professor with a distinguished rank. He's been awarded a number of times the most outstanding professor in the department. And he's a great teacher, actually. And he has about 180 peer-reviewed scientific papers. Now, his work is in many, many different areas. Remember, he studied physics and computer science and material science and engineering. So he went and applied quantum mechanics and understanding of materials at microelectronic levels. He worked with companies like Motorola and Ford Motor Company and General Motors, and advised companies like Intel and Boeing and other places, Medtronics, many different areas. And he worked in catalytic converters, he worked in adhesives, he worked in metals and aluminums. And after doing all of that work and having great contributions and having some 10 patents, then he developed a passion for autism research. I'll let him talk about that. Now, he's not only a professor of material science and engineering, he's also associate faculty at the Health Through Microbiomes. He's the director of the Autism Asperger's Society, research program at ASU. And he's in the PhD neuroscience program, faculty of that at ASU. So he's multi-talented, multi-dimensional person. And so I'll let him talk about all the things he does in here, okay? Not everything I understand. But thank you, Jim, for coming and talking to us, okay?
Thanks very much, Shahryar, for the kind introduction, and thanks very much for having me. I'm going to be talking about autism, but autism as it relates to human health. That autism is really the tip of the iceberg in what has gone wrong in our gut health and in our mental health. And you're going to find that the talk I'm going to share with you relates to probably a third of the people in this country have major gut problems that are affecting their physical health and their mental health. And now we're learning much more about the causes of that, how to test for it, and new treatment that is going to be revolutionary in helping many, many people with those issues. So, as Shahryar mentioned, just a couple caveats. Because of the research I've done, I've also become the president of Autism Diagnostics because we developed the first medical test for autism that we're applying to the FDA now for FDA approval. I'm also the president of a company, Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, because the treatment we've developed not only as having big benefits for children with autism in gut health and mental health, but has the potential to help probably about a third of Americans. I'm driven by all this work because I have a daughter with autism. And that was what inspired me many years ago to begin this work. But we needed to form these companies to be able to commercialize the results so we can get it out to the general public. So I wanted to start a little bit. I think it's always fun to tell you a little bit about my own story. My daughter, Kim, my second daughter, was slow developing since birth. I remember being worried at 6 months. She just wasn't very physically active. She wasn't crawling until 12 months. Most babies are crawling by 6 to 8 months. She was slow walking. Wasn't walking until 12 months. But that was a minor issue. What really concerned us is she wasn't aware of us. She didn't respond to her name. She didn't play with toys normally. She did not have any expressive language. But I knew it wasn't a hearing problem because I opened the jar to the cookies, she'd come running. But she couldn't respond to her name. So at age 2, we had her evaluated. Age 2.5, they said it's probably autism, but it's so early it's hard to be sure. And then we went to the expert in the country, and she diagnosed our daughter with severe autism and severe intellectual disability. And we were told that it was just a matter of time, that there was no treatment, there was no cure. We didn't know. They didn't know what the cause was. They didn't know how to treat it. And they said, you're just going to have to love her and then institutionalize her as she becomes older. And that's still the diagnosis given to many families today, that they don't know the cause, don't know how to treat it. There are now some treatments out there, but still many families don't have access to those or not aware of them. A clue that was that my daughter also had mild constipation, but I didn't think any of that thing at the time. When your daughter isn't talking to you at age 3, and still doesn't respond to your name, it's one of the least things you're concerned about. So right away we started speech therapy, physical therapy, a special preschool for her. It didn't do much. We began intensive behavioral therapy, 20 hours a week with her. And she began to respond to that. She could sit at a table and slowly, gradually, they would tell her, apple, and take her hand and touch the apple. And then orange, and take her hand and touch the orange. And slowly she began to understand a little bit of receptive language. But at age 5, she still couldn't talk. She'd take me by the hand to the refrigerator and wait. She didn't even understand how to point for what she wanted. That's a higher level of theory of mind. And so she would wait, and I would say, drink. And she would say, cuh. And then I would give her something to drink. And slowly, gradually, over a couple years, we would practice want drink. I want drink. I want drink, please. So she learned a few rote phrases with 20 hours a week of intense therapy to try to support that. It was very slow going. My wife was a nurse. She was a neonatal nurse. She went to some medical conferences and learned about some research that had been done showing that vitamin and mineral therapy could help children with autism. And I said, how in the world could that be? We've known about vitamins and minerals for 50 years. How in the world could there be a vitamin and mineral deficiency? Then she twisted my arm to go to the conference, so I went and listened and read the research and realized, wow, these vitamins and minerals are needed to produce the key neurotransmitters that are needed for normal brain function. And so then I began my journey into research, and I'll come to that. We also discovered that part of the issue is my daughter had low physical energy as well as mental capacity. She had a thyroid deficiency, and so we treated that. That helped some. By age 12, she had progressed to the point that the first time she said, I love you, and meant it. And that was amazing, but that wasn't until age 12. And some families are still waiting for that at older ages. At age 19, she was in high school, an extended high school program and a work study for kids with developmental disabilities, but we were told she was too disabled to be able to work. And so we were a little pushy. And so we managed to get her into that program for kids with disabilities. And she was amazing. She rotated between 5 different jobs, each day a different job for several hours, and was remarkably fast at doing them. When she graduated from school, she went to an assembly program. First day, other people were doing 200 packages. For her first day, she did 1,200. The next day, she did 1,800. They nicknamed her the Machine because she was so incredibly fast at packaging and assembly. Although it's really hard for her to learn a new skill, once she's learned it, she's incredibly fast. So she would finish her work quickly, and then with a total lack of social skills, she would shout across a room filled with 50 people, a room about this size, at her supervisor, "Dwight, need more, now." That was her social skills. She was there to work. She was going to work fast, and they couldn't keep up with her. So that was great. Since then, we've conducted many, many more biomedical treatments for her. Now, at age 33, her academic skills are still about that of a 2nd to 3rd grade level. She can read short phrases. Her language is still very limited, about that of a 2 to 3-year-old. So she has a good vocabulary, but mixes up grammar and has trouble. You know, if I say, "Kim, do you want lunch?" She hears the key word lunch, and it might mean to her, yes, she wants lunch, so she'll say yes, or it might mean, yes, she already had lunch. So she struggles with yes-no questions, even though she understands the key words. She's very loving to her parents, especially her mom. Dad is distant number 2 to mom. But with other people, she's very friendly. If you greet her, she'll say hi. She'll give you a compliment, you know, nice blouse, nice sweater, nice earrings. And that's about the end of the conversation for her. She can't really converse beyond there. So she's friendly with other people to that point, but never in her life has asked to have a friend come and spend time with her. Just doesn't get that concept. Likes to have mom and dad around in the room, but not necessarily to interact with us. She'll be watching videos or on the internet. So she now works part-time. She's in a day program where they do some fun stuff. She loves making artwork, and then does some work helping with print t-shirts. So she earns some money that way. Unlike when she was much younger and had a lot of behavioral problems because she couldn't express herself. She couldn't tell us her needs. Her only way of telling was to act. So one vivid day, she was about 6 years old. She was in the grocery store with me and very unhappy, so she lay down on the floor screaming. I carried her out of the grocery store screaming, and then I arrived home with her, brought her home, struggled to get her into her seatbelt, but I managed that. A few minutes later, the police showed up because someone had reported that, you know, man had carried off a screaming girl. Okay, that gives you some idea of what it was like. Okay, but now she's generally pretty happy almost all the time. So we've come a long way through a lot of things that we've done with her, but still a very challenged young woman, and yet she's going to have a happy life with a little bit of help. So what is autism? So autism is symbolized by this puzzle piece for many years because we don't know, or people at the time did not know what is the cause of autism, how to treat it, how to prevent it. Back in the 50s and 60s, the prevailing theory, remember this is after World War II and the Nazi concentration camps, the prevailing theory was that the mothers hated their children and abused them like Nazi concentration camp guards treated their prisoners. So the prevailing way to treat autism in the 50s and 60s was send the mothers into psychotherapy to admit their hatred of their child, to give the child a doll that looks like their mother to rip to pieces. That was the therapy in the 50s and 60s. And the man who promoted that theory, Bruno Bettelheim, turns out he had an Austrian accent, like Freud. He faked his PhD, faked his affiliation with Freud, faked his research, and when it all came out, he committed suicide, thank goodness. But he devastated the autism field for decades. My personal hero, Bernie Rimland, who was a psychologist in the Navy, when his child was diagnosed in 1960, he said, My wife doesn't hate my child. This is garbage. He wrote a book, Infantile Autism, and he said autism is a biological condition. And that book slowly changed everyone's mind and said, it's not a mental health problem, it is a biological condition. He had read every article up to the point, and he created the Autism Society of America. He created the Autism Research Institute, which inspired my early work. So, what is autism? Autism involves major impairments in social skills and relationships. So it could be for someone with high-functioning autism, they don't understand appropriate social behavior. They may stand too close to you. Or my daughter at the more extreme end has never wanted to have a friend spend time with her. Communication, some children with autism never speak. My daughter has limited language. At the high level, someone with autism might talk at you about their favorite subject. Let me tell you about the American flag that Betsy Ross created in 1776 in America. And after 20 minutes of talking at you, you begin to think, gee, there's something odd about them, or they're a university professor and they like to talk. Okay? So, also, stereotypic behaviors and desires for sameness. My daughter loves doing the same thing over and over again. If you're making t-shirts over and over again, she's amazing at it. But, for example, when she went from checking in at work each day to having to punch a time clock, that was a devastating new thought for her. She screamed for a day at work, and then the next day she had recovered and she could punch the key clock, and from then on. But we think what was going on is she thought she had been doing it wrong up till that point. She's a perfectionist. So any new change is very hard for her. She's like the little engine that could. She has very little brain power, but once she's learned something, she's got it rock solid, okay? So stereotypic behaviors, a desire for sameness, always wanting to do the same thing. My daughter will watch the same video clip, same 5 seconds, over and over and over again. It's just very calming for her. She knows what's going to happen, all right? So autism is a spectrum disorder. But impairment in social skills is common to all. You can have some people who are very successful in their careers and yet be very socially impaired and be on the autism spectrum. But autism is a label. It's not a medical diagnosis. In the same way that saying someone has a fever, you're describing the symptom. But many things, many bacterial or viral illnesses can cause a fever. Many things could potentially cause autism. So that's been the prevailing view for 70 years. I'm going to change that today. So we know that autism has many common co-occurring symptoms. They often have intellectual disability. Many of them have seizures, and almost all of them have subclinical seizures that you only see with an EEG. Just disrupts their thinking. Many of them have anxiety because they don't understand the world around them. Many of them have ADHD. They have trouble concentrating on something. Many of them are irritable because of gut pain, physical pain, or they just aren't getting their way. They can't communicate what they want. The biggest problem for adults is they develop loneliness. The men desperately want a girlfriend, have absolutely no clue what that means or how to go about finding one. In terms of physical symptoms, many have obvious diarrhea or constipation, beginning in infancy. Our group is the first group to look at medical histories and publish on when did symptoms start. In almost every case, the GI symptoms begin in infancy and last the rest of their life. They're very difficult to treat. Sleep problems, low muscle tone, pica, eating non-food items, usually a sign of a nutritional deficiency, and sensory sensitivities. One woman who's a piano teacher, very sensitive to sounds. If someone's writing with a pencil on a piece of paper, that sound is irritating to her, okay? So why do these commonly occur together? Very puzzling, and I'm going to give you the answer, okay? So prevalence of autism, it was incredibly rare. I had never met someone with autism when my daughter was diagnosed. I'd seen one movie, Rain Man, and that was the only vague clue I had. So rate was of order 2 to 3 per 10,000. It's grown rapidly since then to now be 1 in 36. 3% of children today. This is a huge issue. It's partly due to genetics. There's genetic vulnerability. About 10% of kids with autism have a severe single gene disorder, but most of this increase is real. It's due to something in the environment, and I'm going to tell you what one of the major factors is. I don't have time to go into all of them. But also it's partly due to better awareness, better diagnosis as well. More people are getting diagnosed, especially at the milder end. A severe child with autism, a classic picture is they sit in the corner rocking back and forth, ignoring the rest of the world. Autism literally means living in one's own world, not understanding the rest of the world around them. Okay, so now we'll dive into the meat of things. So as I mentioned, about 40% of children and adults with autism have obvious chronic gut problems like constipation, diarrhea, bloating, and pain. So imagine back to when you've had diarrhea. Probably almost everyone has at some point. Imagine it's not much fun to have it for a day or two. Imagine you've had it for weeks, months, years, decades. That's a problem, okay? So our focus is not to treat the symptoms, but to treat the underlying cause. What is causing those gut problems? I published a paper which has been extremely widely cited by over 1,000 people. One of the first major studies showing that if you have worse gut symptoms, you have worse autism symptoms. So the group in red are the kids with autism who have GI issues. The ones in blue are the kids with autism without obvious GI symptoms. And looking at these four major categories, those with GI problems have worse speech, worse social interaction, worse sensory and cognitive problems, worse physical and behavioral problems. It affects all of it. So that's a big clue. So now we're going to talk about the little guys in your gut. So believe it or not, you have trillions of bacteria in your gut. When you have a bowel movement, roughly a third of that stool is bacteria. Your gut is a bioreactor where a huge number of bacteria live and thrive. They're enjoying the food you just fed them, and they are growing and rapidly multiplying, and in a day or so, they'll be leaving you, okay? So that's your gut bacteria. So what do these gut bacteria do? So you've got about a pound of gut bacteria in you, and these help you with digesting your food and producing key vitamins. Most importantly, this is the one thing you really need to learn from this talk, is they produce butyrate from fiber. The average woman in the US consumes only half the recommended amount of fiber. Men are worse. We consume only a third the recommended fiber. We're not getting enough whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, and beans. So that fiber is critical in producing what's called butyrate, which is the main food for the cells that line your gut. 60 to 70% of their energy comes from that butyrate. And so if you're not consuming enough fiber, then your cells that line your gut are literally starving, and that's probably the primary cause of gut problems in the US, and also, as I'm going to explain, many mental health problems as well. And so they also, bacteria help with water balance. You don't have a stool that's too hard or too soft. Very important, they regulate your immune system. Your gut, your food you eat, the water you drink is a main source of exposure to bacteria and viruses. And so your immune system is centered in your gut. And the healthy bacteria help compete against the bad guys. You have about 400 different species in a normal gut. Unfortunately, there are a lot of very bad bacterial that can really damage you. They can damage your intestines. They can cause GI symptoms that can be fatal. They can produce brain toxins. We'll talk about that. They disrupt your immune system, and they compete against the good bacteria. And so what we want to focus on is trying to have a healthy gut which produces a lot of beneficial metabolites that then leave your gut to the rest of your body and nourish it, as opposed to what's present in kids with autism and many people in the US, bad bacteria and yeast producing a lot of very harmful metabolites that leak out of the gut and damage the brain and the rest of the body. So a stunning study, which fascinated me 25 years ago, and I followed it ever since. There was a small study where they gave a special antibiotic. Normally you give it for just a week. They gave it for 8 weeks to children with autism, and they found that that much of their autism symptoms and their gut symptoms greatly improved. And then they stopped treatment, and within a few weeks, those benefits were lost, even though they gave standard probiotics. So I assisted with a similar study in the UK at the Royal Free Hospital in London. That's the top GI hospital in the UK, United Kingdom. And again, we used a combination of 2 antibiotics for 3 months. Great improvements in GI symptoms, great improvements in autism symptoms, and when we stopped treating, within a month, the benefits were lost. So it told us there are some very harmful bacteria causing those gut problems, causing those autism problems, but getting rid of them isn't good enough because they just come back. They're very resilient. So like with a garden filled with weeds, if you just pluck out all the weeds are just going to come back. We need to reseed the garden. And that took me a decade to figure out how to do that, or to find people who knew how to do it. So just a little bit more background. We now know, our latest research over the last few months, is that 90% of children have extremely elevated levels of toxic metabolites from the gut bacteria or yeast. One example is p-cresol sulfate. 17 studies of it for autism. All 17 studies agree it's elevated in a subset, about a quarter of kids with autism. The more of it you have, the worse your autism severity. It's toxic to the gut. It acts as an antibiotic to kill off the good bacteria so it can survive. And it also damages the gut, causing what we call leaky gut. So toxic things can leak out of your gut into the rest of your body. They damages the mitochondria, which is the energy-producing factor in every cell, in every organ in your body. All right? So it affects every cell, every organ in your body by damaging the mitochondria. And it also is very damaging to the brain. We've discovered many more toxic metabolites that are also significantly elevated in autism. We just haven't done nearly as many studies of those. I want to point out my PhD student over here, Christina, is with me. She's the one who just co-authored the paper. She led our paper on a review article of p-cresol sulfate, reviewing those 17 studies. Like me, she's a parent of a child with autism, so we're both very driven. But we've discovered that almost every child has one of any one of many different metabolites. So bottom line is there are many possible gut infections in kids with autism. The latest meta-analysis suggests there are about 500 different species that are elevated in kids with autism compared to typical kids, and about 100 that they have too little of. So a very imbalanced gut bacteria. And so any one of these toxins could be a clue. So this is a picture of that review paper just published, I think, a week ago. That's how new this research is. As I mentioned, many of the harmful effects of p-cresol and p-cresol sulfate. One of the things I'll mention is for kidney disease. 1 in 7 Americans suffers from chronic kidney disease. When you have chronic kidney disease, you develop very high levels of p-cresol sulfate, which unfortunately kidney dialysis cannot remove. We do not have a way to remove it technologically yet. And the higher that level, the shorter life you have left. It's a very strong predictor of how long you have to live if you have kidney failure. And so, unfortunately, many adults with autism have much higher rate of chronic kidney disease than the general public. So an important clue there for us. And I think I mentioned, maybe I forgot to, with this p-cresol sulfate and 3 studies when it's administered to animals, it causes autistic symptoms in those animals. But you can cure them by taking gut bacteria from a healthy animal, healthy mouse, putting it into the mouse that's been exposed to picresol, and they recover. They recover from their autistic symptoms. Now, we did the human studies before the animal studies, but they agree with one another, so I'll come to that. So this is just a little picture showing that if you give them picresol, mice develop autistic behaviors. You can also take the the poop from those mice, put it into other mice, and then they will develop autistic symptoms. We've done the same in humans. We have taken gut bacteria from children with autism, put it into mice, and the mice develop autistic symptoms. So it's very clear that the gut bacteria in kids with autism can cause autism symptoms. The question is how many kids, and our guess now is to 80 to 90%. So we have now done measurements of 40 different metabolites in urine. 32 of them were significantly higher in children with autism. We still have to investigate what the identity of all of those are, but they basically fall into two categories. They're either from phenylalanine or tyrosine, which are part of every protein meal you eat. So if you were just eating eggs or turkey or ham, any protein has some of phenylalanine and tyrosine, and these bacteria convert it. Normally, your body converts it into important neurotransmitters, dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline. But unfortunately, in kids with autism, it creates corrupted versions. And the same with tryptophan. The bacteria, instead of making serotonin, which again is a major neurotransmitter, and goes on to make melatonin that regulates sleep, kids with autism get corrupted versions of those. So dopamine and serotonin together have a huge effect on your cognition, on your attention, on your mood, and then the melatonin is what regulates your sleep. This explains so much of the behavioral problems that I alluded to in children with autism, all right? And why regular psychiatric medications don't work, because it doesn't matter if you boost their normal serotonin, you still have these poisons in them. So this is just a chart of one metabolite from yeast called beta-carboline. The squares are the typical kids. So this is a plot of how high their level is. So 1x is the average level of beta-carboline in typical kids. Some kids in blue go up to 10 times the normal level. But above there, you only see kids with autism, the red triangles. Some kids with autism have 10, 100, 1,000 times the level of beta-carboline in their urine. And so it's a very harmful metabolite of tryptophan, so it affects serotonin and melatonin. So if we look at how many total metabolites there are in kids with autism, the blue squares are the typical kids. By definition, they all have 0. We use them to establish our reference range. 47 of 50 kids with autism have, on average, 7 extremely elevated levels of these toxic metabolites above that of any typical child, all right? So this test we've developed seems to be 97% accurate. Just a simple urine collection, we can tell if someone has autism or not. What about those 3 cases we missed? The 3 cases we missed, they had a single gene disorder of a specific type that would explain it. So a few cases of autism are due to a single gene disorder. Almost all the rest seem to be due to a bacterial or yeast infection in their gut, which lasts for decades. Now again, this is for autism, but I'm going to explain in a little bit how it relates to many other health disorders. So we're proposing this new autism phenotype, ASD-MDM, which just means that now we don't have to wait for, I forgot to mention that it can take years for someone with autism to be diagnosed properly. I met with a family last week. Their daughter was diagnosed at age 16. They had other diagnoses previously. So the average age of diagnosis is about 5 years. So you lose years of development before a child gets diagnosed and begins getting services. So we can use our test to diagnose a child with autism at age 2, maybe even younger. So we're incredibly bold. In the same way, every child, the day they're born, they get a heel prick to test for newborn screening for a number of genetic disorders. we're proposing to do a national screening of every child so that before the symptoms develop, before the poisons accumulate to the point they begin affecting mental and physical function, we want to check them at age 18 months to 2 years and see if we can prevent autism. Okay. So we've developed this test. We've now have a commercial version of it in the United Kingdom. They have very limited regulations there. We've just submitted a request to the FDA for breakthrough status for the test. Christina submitted that the last week, and hopefully within a week we'll submit the test to the FDA for approval. We hope the test within 4 months or so will be available to the public as an FDA-approved test, a screening test for autism. Again, it won't be conclusive. You still have to go have a psychiatrist interpret it, also evaluate the child's symptoms, but we're really excited. Okay, so moving on, I want to briefly talk about testing and why it's relevant, because we call our test the gut health test, because you can't easily see inside your gut. You can't see if your gut is inflamed and has a lot of damage. You can see a rash on your skin. You can't see a rash inside your gut. So we think that the best way to test, rather than doing an endoscopy or colonoscopy, which is very invasive, it's not much fun, it's expensive, and you can only see part of the gut that way. With a simple urine test, we can see, do you have the waste products of those bacteria or yeast? I forgot to mention a simple example. How many of you have ever drank alcohol? Okay? Alcohol comes from yeast. It is a metabolite of yeast that affects brain function. These metabolites I mentioned, some of them are 100 times more toxic than alcohol. So a simple way to think of it is that kids with autism are drunk on the toxic metabolites from their gut. That if you think of the effects of alcohol on executive function, on emotion regulation, slurring of language, slurring of coordination, poor social interaction in some cases, these are all autism symptoms, okay? So that's the simple, radical way of thinking about it. We have very strong data that says most kids with autism are drunk on these metabolites. So we want to sober them, okay? So what we're going to do is we've developed this gut health test, which looks at several toxic metabolites of yeast, several toxic metabolites of bacteria, some that affect dopamine system, some affect serotonin. And so from this test, you can see, do I have an infection? If I do, is it a fungal infection? Then I should take an antifungal. If it's a bacterial infection, then it gets complicated, because overuse of antibiotics is one of the big problems. You can treat it with antibiotics, temporarily have benefit, and then it'll come back possibly worse. So we'll come back to the treatment. Also, many kids with autism and some of the general public have gluten intolerances or dairy intolerances, so we can test for that too to see if your body's properly digesting those. So this test now, our beta version, is about 86% accurate in distinguishing autism from controls. It's actually a little better than that. I need to update the slide. As we add more metabolites, it will be even better. And again, it tells you if those infections are there and how bad that infection is, okay? And so many advantages to the test. We have a great reference range. We have a great staff. Many labs don't have reference ranges for children, so we took 50 healthy children to make sure, or 47, we had to eliminate a couple who weren't healthy, to establish our reference range. And there's a little logo on if anyone wants to order it if they think they have gut health problems or mental health problems. But we now are confirming the identity of more of these metabolites to add them. We haven't tracked down all the toxic metabolites that are made, but most of them. And we're now applying for FDA approval to get this test approved. And then also it will be a measure to follow. If you try a treatment, is it working? Is it able to lower the levels down to normal? And so I'll tell you about our treatment that was able to lower those levels 90% down to normal. So the last part of what I want to talk about is obvious and hidden gut problems in autism and how to treat it. And this relates, again, to really almost any type of gut problem that people have. Not all, but many. So first of all, why do people with autism have these extremely elevated levels of bacteria and yeast? Partly because they had overuse of antibiotics as infants. So in the medical histories we've researched and other people have researched, one of the major differences in medical histories of kids with autism is higher use of antibiotics the first few years of life, especially for ear infections. Herbicides and pesticide uses are a problem, especially if you use them inside the home or if they're on the food you eat. Poor infant gut bacteria, not having a good initial seed of gut bacteria from your mother. Low fiber diet, huge problem, okay? Limited variety of foods. Many kids with autism, their parents will tell me, we can't get them to eat anything except French fries and chicken nuggets. And the chicken nuggets have to be in a box from McDonald's. I mean, they fixate on a very narrow range of foods, and that's it. And they just don't want to eat anything else. And is that because they're already having pain in their stomach? But for whatever reason, it's so important. Again, this is a major health tip for you. It's so important to eat a wide variety of foods so that way you get a wide variety of vitamins and minerals from them and also a wide variety of dietary fiber. If you eat just a few foods, the same food, every breakfast, every lunch, every dinner, you're more likely to become allergic to that food. You're more likely to have nutritional deficiencies. So nutritionists will encourage eat a rainbow of colors, a rainbow of fruits, colored fruits, a rainbow of colored vegetables. And then finally, 3 major studies, including one by my colleagues at Harvard Medical School, found that kids with autism have reduced levels of digestive enzymes, especially for starches, especially for lactase, which is the enzyme needed to digest lactose, the sugar in milk. And so all of these are contributing factors, and it could sometimes be just one round of an antibiotic that could be enough to cause damage. Just a C-section birth can be enough to cause damage. So what are the standard treatments? There are a lot of standard treatments for gut problems. Improving your diet, taking digestive enzymes, taking fiber supplements, taking probiotics, laxatives, enemas, suppositories, antidiarrheals, antacids. Exercise is good because it helps provide motility. In the extreme opposite case, if you're lying in a hospital bed for a week, you're going to be constipated, okay? So exercise is very important too. But these treatments really don't address the root cause in autism, which is a chronic bacterial or yeast infection. We have to get rid of that infection. All these treatments treat the symptom. They help move a stool through, but they don't help treat the underlying infection. And so in the same way that if you make wine, the longer you ferment that wine, the higher the level of alcohol in it, the longer food waste stays in your gut, the more constipated you are. If you don't have a bowel movement for 5 days, that's 5 more days for that gut bacteria to ferment more toxins, okay? So that's why treating constipation, having a bowel movement at least once a day is good to get rid of all that toxic stuff. You don't want to keep it in your body, okay? So there are some advanced treatments. Spent 25 years researching a vitamin mineral supplement for kids with autism. 10 years ago, I founded a nonprofit that now distributes our vitamin mineral supplement around the world. Surprisingly, we've had a number of people with ADHD try it, and they report even more improvement than kids with autism. But there are a variety of specialized diets that are used, so going gluten-free, going dairy-free, avoiding certain problematic foods. We did the largest probiotic study ever done for children with autism. We completed it about a year ago, where we first tested all the bacterial species in the child. So we measured roughly 2,000 species of bacteria in each person, or up to 2,000, and then used that to guess which one of the standard probiotics should we give to that particular child. So we did that with 200 kids. saw a little bit of benefit. Why only a little? Probiotics are great in concept, but lousy in practice. The reason is almost all probiotics are grown in milk. They grow very well in milk, in air. Your gut is not like that. Your gut has almost totally different bacteria. When you take probiotics, they pass through your gut, but they don't colonize. So when you stop taking them, they leave your body soon. Probiotics are aerobic. They grow in air, but most of your gut bacteria are anaerobic. They are killed by oxygen. So imagine you were trying to grow 500 species and you only have seeds for 20. You can't grow the other 480. You just can't. So probiotics that are given are the wrong type. They're just a small fraction, about 5 to 10% of the bacteria in your gut. They won't hurt, usually, but they aren't usually going to be much help. So we did the best study we could, and again, just not much benefit. Antifungals, effective for treating yeast, but you need long-term treatment for them. But the new treatment we've developed, which is revolutionary, is Microbiota Transplant Therapy to replace harmful bacteria with gut bacteria from super healthy humans. The idea is to heal the gut and thereby heal the brain. I'm going to digress a moment here and say, how many of you have heard of a very nasty type of diarrhea caused by Clostridium difficile or C. diff infections? Okay, quite a few of you. All right, so it's a nasty, life-threatening diarrhea. It used to affect about 500,000 Americans a year, used to kill about 29,000 Americans a year. That's about the same numbers as injured and killed in car accidents, okay? It primarily strikes people in nursing homes and hospitals because it's explosive diarrhea. It's very contagious. It causes life-threatening diarrhea. You get weaker and weaker. It can be treated with antibiotics, but then it often comes back again and again until you weaken and die. It was discovered back in the 80s. If you took a little bit of poop from a healthy person and through a colonoscopy, or an enema, gave it to a sick person with C. diff, they would be cured in 2 to 3 days, 90% of the time. It was miraculous. It is miraculous. It has now been approved by the FDA, finally, for treating C. diff. But they classified this type of treatment as a drug. Human bacteria from a healthy human, they've classified as a drug. So we found that for autism, it's much harder to treat than with someone with life-threatening diarrhea. So we had developed a new way to help them. So this is an investigational treatment we've developed. It's still under approval, still not yet approved by the FDA, but we've completed 4 clinical trials for kids with autism and a related condition called Pitt-Hopkins. We have 2 more studies underway. We've seen up to 80% reduction in gut symptoms. Severe autism is reduced to mild to moderate autism. Benefits continuing in most cases 2 years after treatment is stopped. So with C. diff, by the way, once you're treated, unlike with antibiotics, you're pretty much cured for life. You almost never does it come back after you're treated with human stool. And so we formed a very unusual company, Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, to fund clinical trials to get this treatment approved for kids with autism. So we formed a unique company funded by 70 autism families to help autism families. And so we are still have openings for that, for fun, if people want to learn more about investing. So what is our treatment? First, we use that special antibiotic I mentioned to kill off the harmful bacteria. Then we do a bowel cleanse. I assume many people here have had the joy of a colonoscopy prep. So that's what we do, flush out the remaining bacteria, and then take our microbiota for 8 to 16 weeks, either swallowing a capsule or taking a powder, just mixing the powder with a little bit of milk or yogurt. So it looks like a probiotic capsule, The difference is instead of 1 to 10 species that are the wrong species, it's about 400 species from the super healthiest donors. For C. diff, pretty much anyone can be a donor, anyone who's not extremely ill. With autism, even the top few percent healthiest people, even only a subset of those are able to help. Autism is really hard to treat, but it is treatable through this intense approach we've developed and patented and are now trying to get approval from the FDA. So it's a natural treatment. We're just restoring the gut bacteria that should be there in a healthy person. This is just a plot from our first study. On the left is GI symptoms. We see at the end of treatment, 16 of 18 kids had dramatic improvements. 8 weeks after treatment, it was now 17 of 18 kids had improved. And 2 years later, the one kid who had held out, they had finally improved as well. But a few kids did lose benefits. One of them had antibiotics. A few others were still on very poor diets. But 80% reduction in GI symptoms initially, and most of those benefits holding. And with autism symptoms, we see that at start, 80% of the kids, over 80%, were in the severe range. 2 years after treatment had stopped, less than 20% are severe, 40% mild to moderate, and almost 50% below the cutoff for even mild autism. They still have symptoms, but it is a huge improvement. This is open label, there's some placebo effect, but very, very promising. This is our expert evaluator rating these people. Most parents told me their child was better able to learn, better able to slowly begin learning language, social interaction, beginning to improve their behavior. When that gut pain was gone, they were much less irritable, but also their other mental health conditions improved as well. So again, that phase 1 study, 80% reduction in gut symptoms, reduced autism symptoms quite a bit, and very safe. We had 0 dropouts from our first study. Now we've treated over 100 children and adults with autism. 0 have dropped out due to adverse effects. So it's a very, very safe treatment. Nothing's perfectly safe. This just is a chart for adults. I forgot to mention, we then received a $1 million grant from the federal government to treat adults with autism who had had these GI symptoms 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And green is the treatment group. We treated them for 8 weeks, they improved. Well, what about another 8 weeks? So we gave them an extra 8 weeks and they improved more. And then we stopped treating them at the end of part 2, and over the next 18 months, they continued improving. Okay? They're continuing to learn. Now that those poisons are gone from their body, they're able to begin catching up to their peers. Now, the group in orange, the first 8 weeks, they got placebo, not much change. But then they got 8 weeks of treatment without the antibiotic. They had some improvement, but then they flatlined, so they needed more. So we're at the early stages of this treatment as to how much to dose. It's like when you have a headache, and aspirin was developed. Do I give half an aspirin? That helps. But if I give a whole aspirin, would that help more? And if I have a really bad headache, maybe I need 2 aspirin. So we're still figuring out the optimal dosing. I think we're underdosing. I think we have a chance for even more improvement than I'm showing you here. And we have some data to back that up. So this is not the treatment success. This is so far. This is how much success we've had. This shows the wide range of treatments. This is 20 different symptoms that we looked at. And green is the treatment group, orange is the placebo. You see in every symptom, the treatment group did better than placebo. So starting on the left, tantrums. If you have a 200-pound adult with autism having a tantrum, it's not a pretty picture. Okay, so 65% reduction in tantrums versus 25% for placebo, but also big improvements in GI. But look at the next set of symptoms. What do they have in common? Aggression, hyperactivity, mood, self-abuse, sleep. Those are all relate to your neurotransmitters, to your mood, to your mental health, okay? And we see improvements in many other areas as well. So again, not a cure, but really nice improvement in a condition that's been viewed as lifelong and incurable. And so just a quote from one family: "I believe the treatment was foundational for my son. He seems happier and more well-adjusted. He's less anxious, less OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. His troublesome behaviors, his outbursts, are now much less frequent and less intense. He's sleeping much better." That's melatonin. "His daily bowels are regular and normal." Another parent said, "My son is 30, ADD and autistic. He's always had GI problems since he was a baby. This study was a miracle for him. No more pain, smell, or mess. This is more than we could have hoped for, and there's a bonus. His depression and anxiety levels are way down." One of our patients was on 5 anti-anxiety medications, and after treatment, they didn't need them, okay? So this is a related condition we investigated called Pitt-Hopkins. How am I doing on time, by the way? Okay. All right. So I'll wrap this up in another few slides. So Pitt-Hopkins is a really severe condition. So if you imagine how bad autism is, imagine the worst autism cases, and these are worse than that. So Pitt-Hopkins is a genetic disorder. The kids are mostly in wheelchairs. They can't walk. They can't control their body. They mostly cannot talk. They mostly have an IQ of about a 1-year-old. So they can't even point in many cases, all right? But the worst thing for them is severe constipation. Almost all of them have had to go to emergency rooms for cleanouts. Some of them have died from their severe constipation, all right? So they're in bad pain. So the Pitt-Hopkins Foundation said, no one's ever done a clinical trial to help our kids. It's a very rare condition. There's only about, we estimate, 1,500 cases in the US. So they asked us if we'd treat them, and they raised money from their families, and we ran the study. We had to subsidize it a fair bit, but we did. We found, again, it was very safe. 80% reduction in GI symptoms versus 30% for placebo. 90% reduction in pain versus 29% for placebo, and averaging over 29 symptoms compared to placebo. I won't go through each one, but green is a treatment group, blue is placebo. You see in 29 symptoms, it's looking awfully good. So we can't cure the genetics, but we can help a lot with their symptoms. So one of the key findings is that butyrate. Remember that key substance I mentioned that comes from fiber? That increased 78% after treatment and didn't change in the placebo group. So that butyrate, again, is so important because also these kids have, as I mentioned, very poor physical and mental health issues, cognition issues. Butyrate, it turns out, is also needed to improve the mitochondria. So we discovered these kids had half the normal functioning of mitochondria, so their cells are producing half the energy that a normal cell would, and we boosted it up to 3/4 of normal. So we didn't cure it, but we got halfway towards improvement. So that's, again, part of the reason for that improvement. So wouldn't you like to have some extra energy? Okay. So here's a quote from the director of the Pitt-Hopkins Foundation. This is from a letter she wrote to the FDA asking them to approve this treatment for Pitt-Hopkins. She said, "This MTT trial from ASU was the first clinical trial ever done for Pitt-Hopkins. The results were astonishing for children who participated. All of the children who participated saw an improvement in GI symptoms. My own son took part in this trial, went from being in pain daily to hardly ever being in pain. In his 12 years, this is the first year he enjoyed his birthday and Halloween as a result of not being in pain. Other families saw improvement not only in GI, but in mood, again, neurotransmitters, behavior, and irritability. Across the board, there were no adverse side effects, and more than a year after ending the trial, the benefits are still continuing for the children." So that was our first study with capsules, but most of these kids can't swallow capsules. So we developed a powder version, which they can take with an antacid to suppress the stomach acid. So we started that a year ago. It'll finish in a year, and then we're going to apply for FDA approval. For ultra-rare conditions like Pitt-Hopkins, the FDA says just 2 trials is enough. So in 2 years from today, I hope to have a first product on the market for Pitt-Hopkins, which would be really exciting. And by the way, the FDA gives us a special bonus when you get a drug approved for a rare condition. You get a special voucher from them you can sell for about $100 to $150 million to a drug company to help them get their drugs reviewed more rapidly by the FDA. So if we succeed, we've received both orphan drug designation and pediatric rare disease designation from the FDA. So basically they've told us we qualify. If they approve our study, if they approve this treatment, then we will get that voucher and we'll be able to sell it and finance our research. But for autism, we've already done 3 studies. We've started our 4th study, our dosing study. If you have a treatment, imagine aspirin. You take half a pill, no adverse effects, and it's helping some, why not take a whole aspirin? So we're going up to a higher dose to see if we can see even more benefit than we have so far for kids with autism. Because I don't want to only help kids with autism, I want to provide the maximum help we can. So we're doing a dosing study now. And then we have to do one more final phase 3 study. Just like phase 2, just has to be done at many sites around the country, and we have to have many more people in it. So about 200 to 300 kids. Normally you might have 1,000 for an FDA-approved drug, but this treatment is so safe that the FDA it seems like we'll only need a few hundred people. And so then we'll run that study at Harvard and with several other sites, and then apply for FDA approval for autism. So that's our goal there. So we have a very unusual company. We've already raised $7 million from 80 autism families who are investing in us. And we now have to raise $20 million for our next phase 3 study. So if you know of people who would like to invest, our best estimate, our conservative estimate is that sales will be about $2 billion a year. And believe me, that's small in the pharma world, okay? So it may sound like a lot, but it's still small in the pharma world, but it's enough to give our investors probably about 100 times back what they invest in us. So for those who invest 100,000, they'll probably get about 10 million back. Not right away. It's, first few years we're doing research, but once we finally have FDA approval, we hope we'll be very profitable. And so those families are investing in it primarily because they know GI problems are a big factor in their kid's life, and that's why we're doing it. Now for the kicker, and this is where I've alluded to a little bit. My colleagues at University of Minnesota have the only production facility in the US for making this special product, taking human stool, purifying it, checking the donors incredibly well, checking the stool incredibly well, and they are now supporting many clinical trials around the country because gut health affects so many other conditions. So each dot here is a different clinical trial underway or completed for using this microbiota product. So for cardiovascular health, one of the biggest killers in the country, that is largely due to inflammation. And so by treating inflammation in the gut, that is able to help reduce the risk of heart attacks and heart disease. I've already mentioned the antibiotic issues with C. diff. For cancer, if you're on chemotherapy or radiation therapy, that can have devastating effects to your gut health, and then that then in turn weakens the immune system. So there are now multiple studies using microbiota transplant as an adjunctive treatment. So that way you then reseed the gut, which then helps support the immune system, and then the immune system is better able to fight off the cancer. So it's being used as an adjunctive therapy to increase the benefits of cancer therapy. It's being used for a variety of digestive disorders, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and other problems. I mentioned it's used for autism and Pitt-Hopkins. It's also being used for Parkinson's disease because people with Parkinson's develop constipation usually 20 years before the Parkinson symptoms. Remember what I mentioned about p-cresol? People with Parkinson's have 7 times the level of p-cresol in their brain compared to typical healthy people. P-cresol damages dopamine, and people with Parkinson's, it's a little complicated, but basically they need the main treatment for it eventually is to give them dopamine. And so it's a little more complicated than that, but basically, again, key issue for helping Parkinson's, also for immune disorders. So we had one child in our study who had severe nut allergy. They go into anaphylactic shock. After our treatment, they were cured of it, and I don't say that lightly. So again, it's being used now at Harvard Medical School to treat peanut allergies. So these are all pilot studies that are being done. This work is not as far along as our autism work. That's why we're going to market first with our autism product, but hopefully it will then be approved for many of these other conditions as well. So it's also extremely safe. I forgot to mention that our colleagues have treated now over 8,000 people with 0 serious adverse effects. And I don't know of many drugs that come close to that level of success. Because again, it's like taking a probiotic, but you're taking the right probiotic. You're taking the ones from the healthiest, the top few percent healthiest Americans. So, just to summarize what we've discovered with Christina's help, as I mentioned, she was a key player in this. 90%, of order 80 to 90% of kids with autism have extremely elevated levels of toxic metabolites. They're drunk on these toxic metabolites. We've measured them in our lab. As I mentioned, there are over 23 other studies showing high levels of a few of these. What we've done is we've identified many more, and we've put them into a test panel. But that test panel, we don't call it an autism panel at the moment. We call it a gut health panel, which anyone can order today from the UK. You can just go to the website, they mail you a test kit, you pee into a cup, and send off your pee to the UK, and then they'll tell you if you have any of these gut metabolites that could be affecting any of those mental health conditions or any of those gut health conditions. Again, we still have more research to do to see what levels are common in those. So we don't know if it's 20% or 50% of people with depression who have elevated levels, but this would explain why many psychiatric medications are not very good at treating anxiety, depression, etc., because you may be boosting the body's normal level of those neurotransmitters, but you still have all these poisons present. Again, why are they present? Because so many people are on bad diets or have had antibiotic exposure or both. So especially if you've had antibiotics and symptoms worsen after that, or if you have gut problems and any of those mental health conditions, then I think you should be tested. So testing is now offered through our partners in the UK. Again, we just started it a few weeks ago, and now we're working on our treatment. This treatment I'm just so excited about for helping people with autism, but the treatment is now being used at the University of Calgary to treat depression, to treat anxiety, to treat OCD, and they're reporting, verbally they told me they've seen good benefits there. So again, this is cutting edge. We're just beginning to learn. I should probably mention that we know so little about what's present in our gut. We can send ships off into outer space, but only in the last 10 years, really only in the last 5 years, are we able to identify most of the species. Many species in your gut we haven't even identified yet. We don't have names for. It's because the technology has just come out in the last 5 to 10 years to be able to test, to be able to count each of these bacteria and develop the names. For example, one of the nastiest ones, C. Boltier, was named after an autism mom because she was the one whose child it was found in. So, yeah, is that an honor? I don't know. So anyway, so if you want to learn more about this, I'm glad to talk more, but there's lots of info on these 3 websites here. And I want to acknowledge the many people, many autism families who've been in our studies. Many groups have funded our work, and especially our 80-plus autism families who have invested often some of their retirement funds in us. Our great research team, including Christina, who's here, the group at University of Minnesota that makes our microbiota products, and our colleagues at the UK who run the testing lab. So with that, I'm glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Looks like the gain is way too.
I think I'm supposed to wait for the mic, so just hold on. Right.
Okay, how about that? Is that better? Okay, we fixed the gain issue. So I'm going to come around the room here with the microphone. I'm going to try to go in order that I saw them. I saw up here first, then back here, and then over here.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was struck by the similarities. The symptoms you were describing are similar with kids with ADHD, and I'm wondering, does this, have you seen any impact of this treatment with kids who have ADHD?
No one has done a study yet for children with ADHD, and we haven't looked at the gut bacteria yet. So the answer is maybe. What I can say is that our vitamin mineral supplement works even better for kids with ADHD than for kids with autism, with a small number we've used so far. But this treatment probably would be very beneficial because it improves ADHD symptoms in people with autism. Most people with autism also have ADHD. Again, it's a neurotransmitter-driven issue. So I suspect it would, but we don't have the money yet to investigate that.
Thank you very much, sir. Great presentation. In the last month, we've heard a lot of stories about the Trump-Musk juggernaut trying to destroy democracy, and along with it, a lot of money going to research programs that are basically being shut down in the middle of the stream. Is that going to affect your research directly or indirectly? Thank you very much.
I'll answer that in a couple ways. There's certainly a big concern at universities that the present administration has told universities they are cutting the overhead from, on average, about 50% down to 15%. So overhead is used to support things like rent, electricity, support staff who manage budgets, technicians, computers, lots of different things. So basically, at my university, they are at ASU, and I've heard this from other universities too, they're now questioning, we may not be able to hire any new graduate students this year because we aren't sure we'll even have the money to support the current graduate students, okay? So that's the very real reality. Our admissions team, having just interviewed a whole bunch of students, now probably has to say, we can admit you, but we have no funding for you. So basically, this year's students are not going to come to graduate school. That's how devastating that effect is, and it could be worse than that too. And will it affect us? My research is funded by 70 autism families, bless their hearts, and so they're not affected by that. But also, members of the Trump administration, like Mr. Kennedy, have said that autism is a priority for them. And so we'll see. We'll see.
I noticed on one of your slides you mentioned Fragile X. Obviously, the MTT would not help with the Fragile X itself, but do you know of any improvement in outcomes for people with Fragile X that have taken the procedure?
So most single gene disorders, like Fragile X, that usually about half of the people with those disorders also develop autism, and about half don't. And so why is that? Well, we suspect one of the reasons might be some of them have gut infections and some don't. In Pitt Hopkins, almost all of them, about 80%, have severe gut problems. So we can't cure Pitt Hopkins, a single gene disorder, but we can reduce the severity of the symptoms quite a bit. But the biggest issue is just getting into the gut pain. You know, when your child, let me be very blunt here, the parents said their children went from hitting and biting them to just playing with them because they're just happier. So for the people with Fragile X who have gut symptoms, yes, I think it would be very helpful. And that's probably of order half. In general, for developmental disabilities, it's very common to have gut problems.
Could you define the difference for me between autism and Asperger's? My grandson has been affected by Asperger's for 25 years, and I'm looking to see if there's anything being done about that.
Yeah. So the actual name of our research program at ASU is the ASU Autism Asperger's Research Program. Asperger's is a name for a part of the autism spectrum where people seem to have normal language and reasonably normal intellectual capability, but still have the same major social impairments, the same major behavioral issues. And so when we, in our studies, we include people on the Asperger's spectrum, with Asperger's, that's one of our qualifying conditions. Now, those with gut problems tend to be more severe. So up till now, we've been limiting our treatment studies to those with obvious gut problems. So I would say if your son has obvious gut problems, he'd be likely to benefit. But we'd also say now that roughly 80 to 90% of people with autism have have hidden gut problems. Way to think of it is that if you have a yeast infection, the alcohol affects your brain, doesn't cause diarrhea, all right? Otherwise, people might stop drinking, all right? So some of these infections affect the gut. Yeast infections pretty much just affect the brain. And so the only way to know is to do a simple urine test. So with a simple urine sample, you could see if he has these issues, and then that could guide you as to what treatment to use. So yes, Asperger's is part of the autism spectrum. It's on the milder side, but still it can, even though we say it's mild, half of people with Asperger's can go and get a college degree and yet be very severely affected socially. Yeah. Great question.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I have about a million different things I could ask you, but I'm going to try to limit myself to just a couple of things that I was thinking about during your discussion there. Based off of the way I understand the research that you've been conducting and the outcomes that you've seen, would there be any reason that somebody who is generally, okay, so for example, a product like fiber, like psyllium fiber husk, can be taken by anyone. You don't have to be suffering from any particular diagnosed disease to see quality of life improvements out of taking a psyllium fiber husk. Would the same be true of the drug that you're developing, where even people who may not be suffering from any type of autism or anything like that might actually see quality of life improvement just by improving their gut biome like you described?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the person. That the estimate is, probably about a third to a half of Americans have decreased amounts of fiber, have chronic gut issues, and/or mental health issues. So I forget the exact numbers, but something like 20 million Americans with depression, 40 million with anxiety. If you're a teen girl, due to social media, it's a third of teen girls have anxiety. Now, we can't deal with the social media aspect, but again, we can regulate the body's neurotransmitters or help the body self-regulate its neurotransmitters. So the answer is, I think if people have any of those mental health conditions that I mentioned or chronic sleep issues, then it's very likely. This test, a simple urine test will tell you, do you have high levels of those bacterial yeast metabolites? And if you do, then you'd probably be an excellent candidate for the treatment. But the treatment is not yet approved by the FDA. We're trying to get it first approved for Pitt Hopkins and then later for autism.
A brief follow-up on that. In your observation, would there be an adverse effect on somebody who, let's say you had a patient who took this drug but wasn't suffering from any of those symptoms? If you look at other SSRIs.
Sorry, people online can't hear you. So,
Tell them I said hi.
so just briefly, could you summarize that real quick so we can get to the next question?
Yeah, I guess what I was asking, I'm sorry, people online, I hope you guys are having fun. I guess what I'm asking is, with some of the drugs that are currently prescribed for people that are suffering from anxiety, SSRIs and whatnot, it would be a bad idea for someone who doesn't have anxiety to take fluoxetine or something like that. Would that be the case for what the product that you're developing, where somebody who doesn't have any issues would have adverse effects if they were to try to take it?
Yeah. So the answer is we don't believe so. That it seems to be exceptionally safe. Now, nothing is perfectly safe. I can give 1 to 2 extreme examples, but in general, the way it's made, because we screen so carefully, the risk is probably less than 1 in 10,000, and that's high. It's probably well less than that of an adverse effect, is our estimate. Again, you're just giving back the healthy gut bacteria that should normally be there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this talk. I've got so many questions, but one is that you alluded to adult problems like Parkinson's, and I would like to know about that. And then also, I would like to know more about the vitamins that you were talking about.
Sure. So for Parkinson's, again, people with Parkinson's are known to develop, to have chronic GI issues, typically constipation, starting of order 20 years before obvious Parkinson's symptoms begin. What happens is people with Parkinson's are known to have high levels of that metabolite p-cresol, reaching about 8 times normal in their brain. P-cresol acts to blocks the conversion of dopamine to the next step, to norepinephrine. And so by doing that, it builds up too high a level of dopamine. By building up too high a level of dopamine, that damages the dopamine receptors and produces in the brain. And then longer term, then they need extra dopamine. So because too much dopamine is toxic to the brain. So basically, the preliminary studies have used low-dose microbiota transplant and seen some temporary modest benefit. We're using a much more intensive therapy with antibiotic treatment and a bowel cleanse and a much longer, higher dose, and we suspect we would see more benefit with that. Again, we don't know for sure, but it seems awfully promising. Yeah. Oh, and the vitamins. So our vitamin supplement is complete, pretty much all vitamins and minerals designed for children with autism. Certain vitamins and minerals, especially vitamins, are needed to make your major neurotransmitters. Especially high-dose B6 is needed to make serotonin and also melatonin, and also dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. So in kids with autism, they had low levels of most neurotransmitters. And in our study, we found we could improve and normalize the levels of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, acetylcholine. I might be leaving 1 or 2 out. So we saw very good improvements there. But we did not see as much improvement in symptoms as we would have expected. And now we know why. It's half the problem. Half the problem is to help the body make its own neurotransmitters. The other half is get rid of the poisonous neurotransmitters. So we have to do both. But I will say with our vitamin mineral supplement, again, it's available from our nonprofit. I don't get any royalties or salary from it. And it's 73% of autism families rated as good. The benefit is moderate, good, or great. So it can be very helpful. Oh yeah, many adults have used it as well. Adults with autism, absolutely. Very frankly, some parents of kids with autism have used it as well, and they tell me, yes, it's helpful to them. It helps them focus more. So that's why, again, we think it would help also with ADHD. We have limited reports. If I had a little more money, we'd go ahead and do a study for ADHD. But we're very constrained by money. Unfortunately, the NIH is focused on autism from the brain up and won't fund our work. So we're having autism families fund it because they know how important it is. To give you an idea how desperate autism families are for this treatment, normally for a clinical trial, you might struggle to recruit 12 people over a year. The first day we announced our last study, we had 500 applications. Within the first week, we had 1,000, okay? I get emails every day from families saying, I need this treatment. And my sad answer is, I'm sorry. We're waiting to raise money so we can start our next study. So we're doing our best to get it there, but it just takes time.
Thank you for a really enlightening talk that touches on so many areas in addition to autism. We have a question on Zoom. One of our attendees was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at age 12, and he was wondering what your thoughts are about carnivore diet.
Yeah. So a carnivore diet has limitations. Carnivore diet is going to be very high in protein, which is digested by the body down into individual amino acids. So you're going to be getting more of those amino acids, which will feed more of your gut bacteria. Now, only a very small fraction of the protein is converted into these toxins. These toxins are extremely toxic, so just a small amount. So in general, we recommend a well-balanced diet. We did a 12-month treatment study with a vitamin mineral supplement with a healthy diet, meaning good intake of fruits, whole vegetables, adequate protein, not excessive. Most Americans get more than they need. And also healthy fats. So fish oil. 15 studies showing kids with autism are low in omega-3s, which you pretty much only get from fish. 5 treatment studies showing benefit. Ours showing the most benefit because we use the highest dose of fish oil. So we recommend a healthy diet for most people. Now, there are a few people who may benefit from a specific allergen-free diet. So I don't want to say it's for everyone, but I'll say on average, that's what we recommend. If they are on a highly carnivore diet, they're absolutely missing many vitamins and minerals, and they're also missing omega-3s. And omega-3s, again, are so important for mental health. They're related to most types of major mental health problems, anxiety, depression, etc. Eat your fish once a week on Fridays. Okay.
Okay, so I do know that we're running a little bit over time, and like the respect to your time, will you be able to stick around for a couple minutes after we shut down the online portion?
I'm happy to stay,
Okay.
and if people want to email me, they can go to the website and find my email address.
Okay, for the online portion, we're going to ask one final question and then wrap everything up.
Thank you for the great talk. So 2 questions. One is quick. Is there a way to get a copy of this presentation?
Sure.
And if so, how?
I'm happy to email it to, if you want to email it out to your membership, that's fine. So if someone wants to just tell me who to email it to, I'm glad to do that.
Okay, thanks. And then the second one is related to your answer just now, because the whole time I've been thinking about this is like, what can people with autism and Asperger's today do? I'm assuming their diet. Can you just touch a little bit more on like those basic like pillars of like, here's what not to eat and here's what to eat if you currently suffer from these disorders today?
Yeah. So first of all, you want to treat constipation so the bacteria don't last long. Our vitamin mineral supplement mostly helps with other symptoms, but has some modest benefit on GI. The 2 complement one another. We published a study on 14 different specialized diets that can be used for autism, and each one has different types of benefits. So in our paper, if you know your symptoms, you can see which one to consider. There are the customized probiotics that didn't seem to work that great, but maybe a little benefit. But I think our test is one of the first things I'd recommend. Do you have a yeast infection? We know how to treat that with antifungals. That treatment is available now. But also, if you have a bacterial infection, at least then you know it, and then can be considering these different things to do. These things on the left will help some, perhaps, but again, the major issue, the only treatment we really know of is microbiota transplant. I think I forgot to mention MTT. We found it dropped the levels of P. cresol 90% down to normal. And so that's very exciting to see that.
Okay, thank you so much for a very interesting, informative talk. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, are there any final podcasts, websites that you recommend that our members visit?
Yeah, so the website I listed, our gut-brain axis, I have a whole bunch of mini videos there, so 5 to 10 minutes, and they cover most of the things that I covered about a research and the testing and how to interpret it. So if they go to the Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics website, there are a bunch of mini videos that sort of walks through in pieces what I covered.